Welcome. Thank you for coming. Before I start, I have to apologize. I have to apologize for a couple of things. First of all, this is by far my most cynical, darkest, meanest, ugliest talk. I don't really mean it to be, I just can't help it. So I apologize for that. It does have an uplifting message at the end. So please don't walk out in the middle. It's also a talk that's really quite hard to give because I need to separate the implementation of something from the specification of something, and we all know how hard that is. So please bear with me. Give me just a little bit of slack if I ruffle any feathers. So let me just start off with a statement. You know, I shouldn't have put my email and stuff down there because now I'm going to get problems. All right, Agile is dead. I'm going to show you why over the next half hour or so, but that doesn't mean we have to stop doing it. To say why, I think I have to kind of go back in time a little bit. So let's go back to 1999, because then we can party, right? So back in 1999, January 1st, you all celebrated the destruction of all your currency and the adoption of the euro. In 1999, Bill Gates became the richest man on earth. Also in 1999, Apple introduced the Power Mac G4. I wish they would bring that form back. It's just so wonderfully retro. I like it. What else did we have? Oh yeah, Bill Clinton didn't get impeached. We had Phantom Menace released. Napster came about. DeForest Kelley died, which is sad. I met him when I was about 12 years old, and we were both at SeaWorld in California. And I actually said hello to him, and he said hello back to me, so therefore, officially, I have met him. But of course, most important of all, 1999 saw the first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, upon which I will base the rest of this talk. No. But it does lead quite nicely into the next slide. How were we developing software back then? Well, one way we were developing software is we were drawing pretty pictures. We were using the Unified Modeling Language, UML, to draw pictures of our classes and of our interactions and everything else. In fact, UML is probably responsible for the destruction of object-oriented programming because its total focus on classes and not objects has corrupted an entire generation of programmers. But, I mean, it does lead to some really nice, pretty diagrams that are terribly useful, things like this. There will be a test afterwards. And then as well as our UML, we may well have been developing our software using the Rational Unified Process, RUP. That's as opposed to the Irrational Unified Process. I don't know, maybe there was one. Not necessarily a bad process, but badly applied most of the time. But that was kind of like what was around. However, the reality was very, very different. 99% of software projects look like this. Valiant people manning the barricades, do or die, mostly die, chaos, smoke, gunfire, death. That was your average software project. And clearly that's not sustainable. It's fun, and you get to wear cool uniforms, but it's not sustainable. So, roughly the same kind of time, there was kind of like a counter, it's not a movement, just a whole bunch of people weren't very happy with the way things were going. Now, the chronology of this is not quite right, but people were thinking these thoughts, definitely in the 90s, late 90s. So Kent Beck was experimenting with extreme programming. And he was, at that point, probably still working on the Chrysler C project, the whatever. And he and Ward Cunningham, Ron Jeffries were all experimenting with XP and how you can push a team to focus on just the important things. Jim Highsmith was looking at his own adaptive software development techniques. Andy Hunt and I were looking at pragmatic programming, not really a methodology, but just more common sense. Scrum's been around since the mid-'80s, but being used in software more and more by then. And of course, we have Alistair Cockburn, who was pushing the crystal clear ideas around about this time. So we had all of these different ideas, all focused on, how can we cut down on all of the bullshit, basically, and just focus on writing software. And most of the people involved in this attended OOPSLA, Object-Oriented Software, I can't remember what it stands for now, programming, whatever, right? And we all sort of sat there and chatted and bemoaned the state of the world, as people are tending to do. And the idea came up, hey, we should probably get together and bemoan this in private. So a meeting in Snowbird, Utah was arranged, and we all turned up. And on the first day, I think we had 2.5 days in total. I can't remember. My memory is horrible, so forgive me if I get this wrong. Jeff can probably tell us better. But on the first day, we turned up in this room. We immediately removed the tables and just set the chairs up in a circle, and then said, OK, now what are we going to talk about? And somebody handed out index cards, and we all wrote down what we wanted to achieve on a couple of index cards. And then we all had great fun trying to fling these index cards into the circle and make pretty patterns and things like that. So that was a good, interesting hour. And then we picked up the index cards and we divided them into piles, depending on what they were about. And it became clear that what we wanted to look at was kind of like the values of our software. What is it that we value when we're writing software? And that actually came together in the next hour or so. The initial stab at the we value X over Y formulation was done by the end of lunch. And then we discussed it and we refined it, and one went and one came, and it was just basically fine-tuning from then on. And then we sat there and we had extra time, and as software people tend to do, we just then filled in the time by creating random stuff. So we produced some principles and everything else. But fundamentally, the values is what we're happy with. And the statement of the values, we felt expressed what we wanted to express about software development. And that's kind of cool. And I think everybody who was in that room will look back on that with some pride. Yeah, I mean, maybe we would have changed it slightly if we were doing it again. But I think given what we had then, everybody is pretty happy with it. And so what happened? Well, we all basically went back home. Ward Cunningham and I put up a website where we published the manifesto, and people could sign up and say, yes, I support this. And as far as I was concerned, and most of the other people there, that was it. We'd launched this thing out on an unsuspecting world, and then we just waved our hands at it and said, that's fine, move on. And that was probably a mistake. Because what has happened since is that the values have been totally lost behind the implementation. Let me show you why I think that is. You'll notice we were careful to call it the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. That's what it says on the website. That's what it said in Dutch. That's what it's called. But that's not what people call it. People call it the Agile Manifesto. And this is the root of all the evil that has followed. No, I'm serious. Can anybody tell me why it's the root of all evil? I'm sorry? Yes! This sentence says that we produced a very agile manifesto, which presumably means that if you put it on a table, it'll start dancing. Yeah? Because agile is an adjective. You cannot call, if you mean to talk about a manifesto about agile software development, it's not an agile manifesto, right? The best you can do is the agility manifesto or something ugly like that. Because agile, there's a definite black spot here for clickers. Agile, as it says up there, is an adjective. I want to stress this, and I'm going to stress this by hypnotizing you all with the word adjective. From now on, anybody here who uses the word agile as a noun, as in I'm doing agile, I'm going to come and I'm going to find your Scrum Master certificate and I'm going to tear it in pieces, right? Agile is not a noun. So it's perfectly okay to talk about things like an agile gymnast, an agile programmer, possibly. I don't like the concept of an agile methodology because I don't think there is such a thing. I mean, there's agile meta methodologies, but not agile methodologies. But, I mean, you can possibly say that. At least it makes sense as a sentence. And so that makes me happy. What doesn't make me happy are when people use it as a noun. Do you do agile? What is agile? Agile Alliance. I mean, even Cosmo's getting in the act. Do you notice, by the way, that not only do they use it as a noun, but they spell it with a capital letter? It's a proper noun, just like God. So this is not good. This is not good. So why do I think this is the root of all evil? It's really, really simple. If I have some adjectives, like, for example, green, right? I can't sell it to you. I can't come up to you and say, here, have some green. Doesn't work. If I said, have some green paint or some green vegetables, absolutely, I can sell you that. I can sell you nouns, but I cannot sell you adjectives. And the industry that sprang up around the Agile Manifesto, oh, I just used the word Agile Manifesto. The industry that sprung up around that manifesto wanted to sell you things. This is where the cynical part starts, by the way. Right? They wanted to sell you things, and therefore they needed to convert Agile from an adjective into a noun, and they succeeded very, very quickly. And so we have this thing, and now they can sell you. They can sell you training and consultancy and books, mea culpa. And actually not really, because Agile Web Development is actually an adjective, so I can get away with that one. And conferences. There are a lot of Agile conferences, and they make a lot of money for people. So this whole industry has grown up around the noun, right? I'll have a kilo of Agile, please. Yes, sir. Here it is. But that's nowhere close to the spirit of the original manifesto and the values of the original manifesto. But it gets worse. Because how do they sell you Agile? The same way they sell you medicine and all sorts of other things. They use fear. Speak to me. Because Agile has all these new words. Scrum, Kanban, right? Spikes, all of these kind of things that people have not heard before. And people get nervous, particularly management, when people are talking to them about all these weird things. What on earth are you talking about? How do I use this? Right? This is strange. So you have to bring in a translator who's going to sit there and spend a day and charge you 2,000 euros to tell you what a spike is. And okay, that's a small thing. There are also new rules. Gone is the hierarchical project structure. And instead, we have these flat teams with a scrum master, and maybe we don't have QA people anymore, and we got all these kind of weird things going on. So again, people are afraid, particularly organizations who rely on that structure in order to manage people. You know, and that's kind of tough. New ways to measure things too. Back in the good old days, right? Everybody filled in a timesheet, and before a project started, the project leader would tell you, this project's going to take 200 hours. And you'd look at the timesheets, and when it got to 200 hours, you would know that the project was halfway done, right? So, I mean, that was comforting, right? You had numbers, you could draw graphs, it was wonderful. Now, they're reporting progress using meatballs or some other kind of weird, like, you know, measure of velocity. Velocity? Right? I don't want you moving, right? So it's all funky, it's all strange. And then underneath it all is this concern, whenever anybody starts doing something new, are we doing it right? Because if we're not, our competitors are going to beat us. So we have to make sure we're doing it right. And then last, but by no means least, cool cells. And this is where we take a large part of the blame. Because as developers, and to some extent as managers in the industry, we are drawn to bright, shiny new things. Right? I mean, you have to look at successive JavaScript libraries to know that. So when anything new comes along, it's like, oh, I want to try that, I want to be good at that. And so you go out and you will try it. Right? But that's kind of insidious, because once you have tried this brand new thing, then you have this kind of weird sense of power. That you know something that other people don't know. Right? This is my step up in the world. And so you're actually kind of, in a way, want to make it harder for other people, because this is your kind of thing. Now, I know it's not a conscious thought. No one here is evil like that. But it happens. I'm going to take a pot shot here at the Ruby community, simply because I'm allowed to. The Ruby community is fantastic. It is wonderful. Right? I love the Ruby community. Over the last 12, 15 years, I would say the Ruby community has done more to push forward testing than anyone else has done in the history of computing. Right? They have a culture of testing, but not just that. They've experimented with many different forms of testing. And they've produced a whole bunch of very cool frameworks which would then be copied into other languages. So the Ruby community is really big on testing, and I'm very proud of them for that. That's great. What I am not so proud of them for is it's gone one step further. And they now have this total bigotry about testing. So if you're a Ruby programmer and you are not getting 100% test coverage, they look at you and they go, you know, I thought you were a programmer. You know, we're not interested in your stuff. Go away. Go away. And they kind of like have the backing of the majority of people there, because testing sounds like it should be something you do, right? I am going to tell you right now, I mostly don't test. When I was, my son was 5 years old, living in Texas, okay? Texas is Bible Belt. And my son was 5 years old, and he was at a school where all the other kids were parroting kind of religious stuff that was told to them by their parents. And he got really sick of this. So he did what any red-blooded 5-year-old would do. He climbed up on top of the swing set and said, if God exists, have him strike me with lightning or something, right? And he did that 3 days in a row. And the school phoned us up and said, this isn't too good, you know? But that's how I feel when I say, I don't do tests, you know? And the reason is that for me, the benefit of tests comes from the design aspects. The fact that it helps me understand the design of my code. It helps me design interfaces for my code, APIs for my code. It helps me decouple my code. And I've been doing it for so long that now I think about that as I'm coding, and the test doesn't have to exist. It still drives the design. And I've done measurements. I don't actually have any more bugs. I will still test complex algorithms, but I won't test the whole piece. So, I am shunned, probably, by the Ruby community. And the same thing happens in the Agile world, right? We can put down people that aren't doing it our way, right? Our way is best. If you're not doing that, you're second class. So because of all these things, I feel quite strongly that the concept Agile as a noun has just become an industry. It's a machine that attacks us on the basis of fear and asks us to pay money to assuage that fear. There's a wonderful example of that is the Scrum Study organization. I was actually just sitting on my browser one day, and you know how the little Google ads pop up in the sidebar, and this popped up. The world is adopting Scrum. Are you? Stop thinking and get certified today. Kind of sums up what I'm thinking, yeah. So. And in order to keep growing the influence of this industry, when first we started out, we were looking at individual developers because we all said that the Agile practices, you know, the XP and the Scrum, were designed for teams, small teams, right? And there were conferences on scaling it, and basically people said, no, you can't scale it. But it was all to do with small teams, 6, 12 people, whatever that might be. But clearly, after a while, you discover that the money is not in the small teams, the money is in the big companies. And so we need to find a way of scaling it. And so, I mean, I'm not trying to knock Craig Larman here. This is a cool thing. It's basically how to nest Scrum inside Scrum. But it appeals to a corporation because it's got little cute figures and it looks fairly complicated, you know. So you look at that and say, yeah, I'll have 2, please. Yeah. And you can tell that this is designed for an organization. You can't quite read it here, but on the bottom here in the legend it says, extra meetings may occur, not shown on this diagram. So that keeps everybody happy. And then of course we have this. Enough said. So I believe it is time to reclaim agility. Because I still profoundly believe in the values of agility. So let me give you a version of agility that you can take away. It fits on one slide. This is what I think agility is. 3 steps plus a loop, right? The 3 steps are, first of all, understand where you are. The second step is take a small step towards where you want to be, and at the end of that step, evaluate what happened. That's all there is to it. And then repeat. Now I say that's all there is to it. That's not easy because you apply this fractally to everything you do. From the naming of variables to deciding where you're going to deploy, right? It's all following this structure. And it's all a big nested set of these things. Now this isn't the whole story, because quite often you'll be faced with a choice. Shall I do this or shall I do that? And that's where the second part comes in. When faced with 2 or more options, choose the one that makes it easier to change in future. And this is simply a corollary of Day's rule of design. All right? I say every single design methodology can be encapsulated into one sentence. A good design is easier to change than a bad design. Right? So whenever you're designing, you have to ask yourself, is this easier or harder to change in future? And you'll discover that every single design principle falls out of that one statement. Same thing here. Make decisions that are easier to change in future. So let me show you something that's agile. This is a little two-wheeled robot-y thing. It's going around in a circle, just like the rest of us. But it's managing to balance on very rocky ground. You'll see it kind of gets hung up and it frees itself out. Doesn't fall over. Totally self-contained. How does it do it? Well, it's basically, you think about it, it's a pendulum upside down. So it's a pendulum that pivots at the bottom and swings at the top. And it has accelerometers and stuff inside it. So if it finds itself falling this way, then it knows it has to scoot the bottom underneath the top to stop it falling over. So it accelerates the wheels. If it's tipping backwards, it slows the wheels down. So that's really all there is to it. And underneath it, it actually uses an algorithm called the PID algorithm. And that stands for Proportional Integrative Derivative. All that really means is there are three factors when it decides what to do about an error. And an error is, hey, I'm falling. The first factor is, which way am I falling, right? I'm like leaning over like that. That's pretty bad. So I really need to spin those wheels fast to get back up again. That's the proportional side. If that's all you had, then the little robot, the second it got even slightly off balance, would oscillate back and forth until it beat itself to death on the ground, right? You need more than that. And that's what the next two terms include. One is the history. The history says, maybe this robot weighs a little bit more on the front than the back, so it has a bias to go forward. Well, over time, that's picked up by the controller algorithm, and it automatically compensates for it. That's the integrative step. And then finally, it works out what the difference is between where it is and where it wants to be. That's the derivative step. So it looks at the anticipated short-term future. The actual whole algorithm was designed about 100 years ago when ships got big. And people discovered that they could not steer these big ships. And the reason they couldn't steer them is that you turn the wheel, and obviously a ship that's really, really big, nothing happens for maybe 30 seconds. And slowly it starts to come around. But you have no idea whether your position is correct on that wheel or not. And then if you wait until the ship is pointing in exactly the right direction, well then you straighten the wheel, it's going to keep turning. So they needed a way of stopping that. And what they came up with was a mechanical system that did the proportional, integral, and differential side of the PID controller. And they wired that between the wheel and the rudder. And then mere mortals could steer ships again. Since then, this is the algorithm that's used in your central heating controller. There's probably 6 or 7 PID controllers in your car. It's the most common industrial process control algorithm. And I think it reflects perfectly what we want to do in the agile world. All right? Find out what the error is, look at the history, and also have a look to see what your change is going to do to the future. All right, change gears just slightly. The reason I'm here is that I wrote that blog post. I was getting really annoyed about the state of the use of the word agile. So I wrote this blog post, and an interesting thing happened. I had not been to an agile conference. I don't think, opinions vary, but I don't think before I wrote this I'd been to an agile conference. I may be wrong. I'd certainly never been to any of the big ones. So I write this blog post, and the next day, my email box is going ding, ding, ding of people inviting me to agile conferences. Go figure. My wife and I love China, so we accepted the invitation to go to the Scrum gathering in, I think it was Beijing. No, Shanghai. And that was great fun. I really enjoyed it. Now, I tried to do a little bit of research before I go to conferences, and this conference had a motto. There's its motto. And I thought, oh, I better translate that. So I went to my good friend Google and said, hey, Google, translate this for me. And Google said, swordsman. I thought, maybe they were angry about the blog post. So I split it into separate characters and said, okay, what does it mean as separate characters? And it said, laugh proud River Lake. Obvious. So my wife took this to her Chinese teacher the next time she saw her and said, okay, what's the story? And it turns out that in China, no, in Chinese, there are these 4-character sequences called Chengyu, and they are basically shorthand. They typically refer back to normally an ancient story, and it just like encapsulates a lesson or some meaning out of that story. So it's a bit like a proverb, but more formalized and shorter. And the particular Chengyu that they were using for this conference actually was not ancient. It was fairly new. It was like 1960s. Someone produced a book, which in English is called The Swordsman, about a kind of modern-day person, well, actually not modern, but relatively modern person who goes out and suffers all sorts of things and ends up dying and everything else. But the reason for the Chengyu is that back in the old days, pirates used to frequent the rivers and lakes. And so if you were a farmer or someone and you had to go down to the river to trade, then you would be scared because you'd be going down into pirate territory. And so the saying is basically to say, you know, keep your chin up, right? Don't let these pirates, you know, whatever, intimidate you. Yeah? Keep yourself proud in the face of this. So that's what the spirit of the conference meant. So, being me, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to China and tell them what their phrase actually means. So I translated it using the American expression, don't let the turkeys get you down. They were surprised. I had to just double check, so I gave them the Chinese for turkey is fire chicken. Is that cool? Don't let them get you down. And what I said, oops, that's a giveaway. Some people, I said, think they are important. They have more knowledge or more experience or more money or more whatever else, and that they feel that that gives them the right to tell other people what to do and how to do it. And I said, these people are turkeys. Don't let them tell you what to do. And then, as you all saw, I said, I'm a turkey. Right? Don't let me tell you what to do either. In fact, all experts are turkeys. All experts tell you what to do and tell you how to do it. And that is wrong. Why is it wrong? I think that's possibly the favorite slide I've ever produced. No rules are universal. In fact, every rule requires a context. For example, it's generally a rule that you don't go around sticking knives into people's throats. Yeah? Good rule. Helps society live a happier life that you don't have to worry about people coming up and sticking you with a knife. So that's a rule, unless you happen to be a doctor performing a tracheotomy to save someone's life. Then it's not a rule. And in fact, I've challenged people over the last year to try and come up with one absolute rule. And so far, I haven't seen one. So I say all rules are contextual. So therefore, you cannot listen to someone who tells you what to do, because they don't know. Right? Any book that says, this is how you write software, is wrong. Because unless that book was written for your team in your company doing your project at this particular time, it doesn't know how you should write software. So in that circumstance, how do you know what to do? How can you possibly know? Because you're out there, you're on your own. You can't buy in, you know, a pound worth of Agile. It's just not going to happen. So what do? You do exactly the same thing you do in any situation where you don't know what's going to happen next. Well, there's two things you can do. One is close your eyes. But the other one is you take a small step forward, See where that got you, and then revise your plan and repeat. And try not to go down any one-way streets. And oh, what a coincidence. That's exactly the same as the process that I've described for running an agile project, or an agile life, not just an agile project. So I think the antidote to Agile Industries, Inc. is in this room. It's all of us, because we are the people actually writing the software. We are the people that have the problems. We are the people actually who have the solutions as well. But it requires courage to apply those solutions. And so this is the uplifting part, by the way, right? And courage is actually one of Kent Beck's original values for XP, right? And I always thought that was a kind of strange thing to have. Now I understand why. Because it takes courage. It takes courage to say, no, I'm going to handle this. It takes courage to say, I know I'm going to make mistakes, but that's the only way I'm going to find out what needs to be done. But I'm going to work hard to make sure those mistakes are small and correctable. Right? Small steps, review, change, make sure your path can be changed. So that kind of thing does take courage. It does take guts. And it takes courage at the individual level, at the team level, and at the company level. But I really think that is the only way we're going to fix this problem and get some life back into the initial agile values. And like I say, I still believe very strongly in them. So let me just leave you with something slightly corny. Agile is not what you do. Agility is how you do it. And after all, that's what we want. We want to do things. Yeah? Our entire purpose here is to create. It's a verb. We need to make things. And for that, we need agility. Thank you very much. Do we have time for any questions? So, are we supposed to finish at 6? Is that right? So, if so, we have time for a few questions if people want to ask them. Or throw things at me, or whatever you want to do. No? Cool.
So, one question, maybe. So, we have a whole Scrum track on here, on this conference. So, what are your thoughts about Scrum, which is basically also one methodology which from experts telling how and what to do, or at least how to do something?
I think that okay, so that's a loaded question, particularly with Jeff in the room. I think that the ideas behind Scrum are powerful, right? The idea of communications, the original ideas of passing the football, all of this kind of stuff, I think is a very potent way of getting a team focused on board and creating software, right? I very much support teams that look to create Scrum environments for themselves. Where I part ways with Scrum is the concept of 2-day Scrum, or even 1-day Scrum Master courses. You know, you turn up for 1 day, you know, maybe or maybe not fill in a questionnaire and you get a piece of paper, you're a Scrum Master, right? That's just bullshit. And that devalues the entire industry, if you ask me. But I also don't like it because there are a lot of books on Scrum, and they all describe how to do it. And they don't necessarily say how to know if you're doing it right, how to change it to make it right for you, and how to evolve it into your own environment. It's like, here's a set of practices, follow them. And most people, honestly, that's kind of what they want. They're beginners at this, they need direction. In the same way that if you're about to jump out of an airplane for the first time, you don't care about the theory of aerodynamics. You want to know what you pull and when, right? That's all you care about. And that's what these beginners do in a team. So they take these books and they follow them, you know, step by step, exactly the way they're written. because that's all they know. And then they end up getting stuck in this process where they don't actually know why they're doing what they're doing, which is the cargo culting that we were talking about at the beginning. And I think that's where I say I think Scrum, the concept, is really, really good. But I think many implementations of Scrum fall very, very far short of that. Is that a sufficiently diplomatic answer?
I get your idea.